lucha para crear justicia. With that, I'm happy to answer any on-topic questions first, and then any off-topic questions, I'll take it away from the podium.
Senator, on the 9/11 families, keeping with honesty, accountability, and trust, there was a report out that George Santos' mother, Fatima DeVolder, was not in New York during the September 11th attacks, as he previously claimed. Have any 9/11 families expressed their opinion to you, sir? And what is your opinion on this? Really,
I don't have an opinion on it. I'm not here to deal with that issue. We're here to celebrate a moment in a dark tragedy, and Mr. Santos will ultimately have to deal with whatever is the truth of his circumstances, but I have no opinion.
Why were these families previously left out of the fund? And second question, do you have a target for annual consistent funding of this fund?
They were wrongfully left.
I'm just struck by the chaos, confusion, dysfunction of the Republican conference. They defended putting him on committees, and now they're announcing that he's not going to serve on a committee. So I don't understand what the play of the day is. We have said from the very beginning that George Santos is not fit to serve on any committees. Republicans defended him initially as they announced his committee appointments. So I'm pleased that they agree with us now. I just don't know if we can trust them, if this is just the decision of the week or if this is the final decision. But clearly, George Santos has some issues and concerns, and this is likely the outcome of his meeting with the speaker. But it's unfortunate when Republicans are put in a position to defend someone who only has a passing relationship with the truth, and we'll see what the message is related to Mr. Santos for next week. Ted, you want to?
Sure. I also urge George Santos to listen to his Republican and Democratic constituents and also resign from Congress as well.
Chair recognizes Ms. Bush.
Thank you. To Mr. Dunn, my condolences. Very, very sorry for your tremendous loss. To Judge Samaniego, thank you very much for your testimony and for listening and enduring and for giving your testimony. St. Louis and I are here to recognize the humanity of all people, regardless of immigration status. You know, we are here in opposition to any racist agenda pursued by Republicans. And let's take a moment to reflect on this first month of Republican control of the House. The disastrous and embarrassing speaker's vote that resulted in the selling of the gavel to a bunch of pro-coup members of Congress, the seating of insurrectionists, and someone who defrauded his way into Congress. That's where we are. And now this hearing, whose purpose, it seems, is to amplify the anti-immigrant hysteria and right-wing conspiracy theories. The Republican position on immigration is to inflict as much cruelty as possible on people fleeing suffering and persecution. As Democrats, we need to recognize this reality and refuse to be a part of it. That's why I strongly oppose the administration's expansion of Title 42 and the reinstatement of the asylum transit ban. These lawless and inhumane policies deny the right to asylum while failing to address any of the underlying structural problems of our immigration system. So, Judge Samaniego, I want to ask you, do you believe Title 42 is an effective or a humane immigration policy?
It is not. And I thank you for being practical, because I need to get back to this idea of detaining them until they're able to vet them. That's one of the most impractical things I've ever heard of. Right now, Border Patrol is shivering, thinking, how are we going to do that? Without the community being involved, we're pushing that on them, where they have 1,400 spaces, and we're going to detain them. And we talk about the humanity of the Border Patrol. Just think about what it would take to detain until we vet them. It'd be impossible. I remember growing up and we'd say, you know, how do you put 50 people in a Volkswagen, 25 in the front, 25 in the back? That's about as impractical as this idea of detaining them until you can let them go when you don't have the facility, you don't have the manpower, and it's those impractical solutions that confuse people. And so I tell you that we know we've been able to manage things, and we know that when there's issues in other parts of the border, it's because of the lack of organization, it's the lack of collaboration, it's a lack of a lot of different things. So when you have people running in to your country because you're not well organized and you're not using collaboration, we've had 2 or 3 incidents. We have 800 people out that we're not able to manage because of funding. There's communities that have had as many as 10,000 because they're not organized properly. So I can tell you our strategy works, and if people listen to it, and we were able to share the ideas and how we've been successful, I can tell you that we minimize the problem, incredibly minimize the problem for the federal government. And there should be some kind of appreciation for a community that is sensible about what's happening in El Paso, and we all know that we don't want it to happen to the rest of the nation. And all we hear is, you know, that I used the wrong word or that I said racist. I never said that. What I said is that using those narratives creates more racism in a community. I didn't say anything about the people involved in it. So I thank you for looking at practical reasons, and I'm appalled when somebody has an idea like detaining them as a solution, when that's the most impractical thing you could probably do. Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you for your work, and thank you for explaining that. As Democrats, we must refuse to adopt illegal and ineffective solutions to this complex, long-standing crisis. We must be better than what we're seeing coming from Republicans. Republicans want to talk about Biden's border crisis, but the reality is we have a broken immigration system because Republicans want us to. So they can hold these hearings to mask the fact that they have no affirmative agenda that actually helps people. So they can spew their lies about immigrants bringing fentanyl across the border while exploiting victims and refusing to support investments in public health and addiction treatment. So they can take out their anger and insecurities on the most vulnerable. History will not look kindly on those politicians. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Humphrey.
Forego questions, so Dr. Burgess, you're recognized for questions.
Well, I want to thank both of our witnesses for being with us so late this evening. You've done such a great job with your presentations. I have no questions. I hope we pass an appropriate rule to allow your bill to come to the floor.
Thank you. I now recognize our distinguished ranking member for any questions he may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the statement of administration. The SAP says, and I quote, the administration strongly opposes H.R. 1163. Contrary to its stated purpose, this bill would strip state unemployment insurance programs of essential resources to fight fraud, combat identity theft, and recover overpayments, and would set back the goals of strengthening the program integrity and combating systemic fraud, end quote. It further says, and I quote, if the President were presented with H.R. 1163, he would veto it, end quote. Mr. Davis, the Ways and Means Committee,
Without objection.
thank you, the Ways and Means Committee recently held a hearing on UI fraud. Does this bill address the policy recommendations made by the witnesses?
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. The recent Ways and Means hearing featured only Republican-invited witnesses. The bill does not address the following Republican witness recommendations. They were to provide adequate and consistent funding for state staffing and technology, or restore cuts to the Biden budget forced by Republicans. GAO, DOL Inspector Generals, and the head of the Pandemic Unemployment Task Force. Fully fund investigations and prosecutions by the DOL Inspector General. Clearly amend the criminal code to extend the statute of limitations for specific crimes during the pandemic to ensure that those who committed criminal fraud are brought to justice. These are from the DOL Inspector General. In fact, every expert we heard from at our full committee hearing said that the single most effective way to prevent future fraud would be to reliably, predictably, and adequately fund administration of the program so that states had functional technology and enough well-trained staff. This bill does not do that, and the Ways and Means Chair ruled that an amendment to address this recommendation as non-germane to the topic, showing a disdain for what is actually needed.
And let me ask you, what will the Department of Labor have to cut if the remaining $400 million in ARPA funding is rescinded?
Mr. McGovern, DOL is preparing to release about $200 million in state grants to fund best practices in fraud prevention, detection, and overpayment recovery, including ways to approach identity verification that balance the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that is NIST, which is Identity Verification Standards, with equitable access to benefits. DOL is also prepared to make substantial investments in state technology upgrades and using the funding to provide ongoing support to the Tiger teams that advise states on system improvement. Further eliminating the ARPA dollars also would put the DOL Inspector General's fraud investigation at risk in the future because DOL is using conditions of funding on ARPA grants to ensure that the Inspector General has access to state data needed for fraud investigations. The loss of the ARPA funds would likely make DOL unable to extend the grants, which means the Inspector General might lose access. At the beginning of the pandemic, the Trump Department of Labor refused to help the Inspector General get data access, forcing them to subpoena all the states and delaying investigations by several months.
Thank you. Chairman Smith, maybe I missed this in the opening. What kind of rule did you request? Did you request open rule, modified closed rule, or closed rule? What did you have? I didn't hear.
I would assume since this is a revenue bill, this would be considered a closed rule.
Well, there's no magic rule that says because it's a revenue bill that
That's typically what the practice has
has to be the
been.
closed rule.
Can I chime in to
You
a
can say whatever you want to say.
that was made earlier? The witnesses that was at our hearing were all government witnesses. It was the GAO Comptroller General, it was the Department of Labor Inspector General, and it was the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. Those were the three witnesses. They were government witnesses.
Do you consult with the ranking member about these witnesses, or do you just do it on your own?
I consult with the ranking member on all kinds of things.
But I mean, on these
Hearing was-
witnesses, I don't know. They may have been perfectly fine witnesses. I don't know.
believe
But I guess
Biden
the point he was
is
making,
president, which is your
the point
administration.
that he was making was that he did not, if I'm understanding Mr. Davis correctly, that the Democrats were not asked which witnesses that they would like to see.
And the money that's being pulled out is also unobligated COVID dollars, the $400 million. It has not been obligated by the Department of Labor. It's only unobligated funds.
Yeah, well, let me just make one final comment here. I mean, this has been a long day, and it's not over yet. It's going to continue to get longer. And we're dealing with two pieces of legislation that if you're a betting person, aren't going to go anywhere because the president has veto threats against both of them. And it is a little bit frustrating to be dealing with both these bills right now when we do have a problem in this country. We heard a lot on the earlier panel about our security. Well, we have people dying of gun violence every day in this country. We have massacres happening every day in this country. We had a massacre that took place in Allen, Texas on Saturday, and not a word from anyone about that, or not a peep on what we're going to do about it. And we have this happen over and over and over again. And it just, at some point, we have to focus in on the people's business and solving problems that quite frankly, we're going to have to come together on and figure out a way to deal with it. And it's also worth noting that on this day, while we're doing all of this and ignoring the gun violence in this country, a jury found that Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner, liable for sexual abuse and defamation. On this same day, we find out that your Republican colleague, George Santos, if that's his real name, has been criminally charged by the Department of Justice. And, I mean, I will tell you, objective observers watching what we are doing have to be scratching their head and saying, what the hell is wrong with this place? In any event, I have no further questions. I yield back my time.
Thank you. I think
At this point, Mr. Speaker, I would yield 3.5 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Rules, Mr. McGovern.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 3.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, we are about to debate H.R. 2, a horrible immigration bill that betrays our values, that hurts our farmers, that makes it easier to put fentanyl on our streets. And we're told it was rewritten in a back room in the Speaker's office. I have yet to see the rewrite. In fact, I haven't even heard a description of what was changed. And I want to say for the record, from a process standpoint, this is as bad as it gets. My friends should be ashamed of themselves. But wait, there's even more. I wasn't planning to speak today, but I have to point out the ridiculous hypocrisy of what's going on. Republicans are here on the floor with straight faces, acting like unemployment insurance fraud is one of the top problems in America. They ignore billionaires who pay no taxes, but they want us to believe there's an unemployment insurance crime spree. And so here we are. They're going after farmers and veterans, after workers and families that needed help during the pandemic, while at the same time a sitting member of the House Republican Conference was indicted in federal court this morning for unemployment fraud. Let me repeat that. We have a member of this body, a member of this Republican conference, a key swing vote on their debt ceiling bill, a key swing vote to secure Kevin McCarthy's speakership, who this morning was in federal custody for, let me quote this from the indictment, falsely claiming to be unemployed while he was making $120,000 a year. I mean, is this a joke? George Santos allegedly stole almost $25,000 in unemployment benefits. And here's the part that you can't make up. This is too absurd to be true, but it is. Their bill defunds the program that catches people who commit this kind of fraud. I have a letter in front of me from the Department of Labor, which I will insert into the record, that says their bill defunds the program that helps them catch fraud. Now, maybe that's why George Santos co-sponsored it. Of course he did. If this becomes law, maybe he would have gotten away with it. But I think we should rename this the George Anthony DeValder Santos Fraudster Protection Act. What's that old horror movie saying? The call is coming from inside the House. You're going after fraud, but the fraud is coming from inside the Republican conference. Deal with that. And here's the bottom line. The modern GOP has become the party of corruption and crime. It's all about power for them. They put their own power above the people we represent. Their front runner for president is a sexual abuser and has been indicted for his illegal hush money payments to cover up his affair. They won't denounce it. Their key swing vote was in federal custody for allegedly stealing unemployment benefits and lying to Congress, and they won't kick him out. They want to gut the Office of Congressional Ethics. And they want to make it easier for rich people to cheat on their taxes. And now they want to pass a bill that would make it easier for George Santos to get away with fraud. Forget honor, forget principles, forget integrity. All they care about is power at any cost. It is disgraceful, it is shameful, it is wrong, and I urge a no vote on this rule and the underlying bill.
Time has expired.
Thank you. I would like to go back to President Trump. In the context of what you heard last night at the CNN town hall, what in your mind would his potential return to power mean for the United States?
Well, it would be a very dangerous, devastating, and destructive thing if Donald Trump got anywhere close to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and Exhibit A for the trauma that the American people will experience if that were to happen were his own words and performance at that so-called town hall meeting. The modern-day Republican Party is the party of Marjorie Taylor Greene, George Santos, and Donald Trump. That's the reality, folks. You can't make this stuff up. That's the reality. And later on today, apparently, House Republicans are going to try to pass legislation that will restrict, if not end, the ability of the federal government to confront unemployment insurance fraud. At the same time that one of the leaders of the House Republican Conference here in Washington, D.C., George Santos, has been charged with unemployment insurance fraud. Why do I say he's one of the leaders? Because the Default on America Act would not have passed the House of Representatives without the support of George Santos, who was the deciding vote. And perhaps that explains why my Republican colleagues have failed to take any action to remove someone who is clearly unfit to serve in the People's House.
On that, you said before that you and Kevin McCarthy are friends, you talk a lot, you text each other. Have you had any conversations with Kevin McCarthy about George Santos? I know the House is usually very reluctant to expel one of their own, but has there been any sort of discussion with the Speaker about any support you all would offer or anything regarding George Santos?
Not this week, not recently, but I have made clear, both to Speaker McCarthy and others, that I find the whole George Santos thing an untenable situation. It's beyond the pale. He lied his way in to the United States House of Representatives, separate and apart from the very serious indictment that just came down this week, separate and apart from the criminal indictment. Reasonable people back at home in New York and throughout America have already concluded the guy does not belong in a separate and co-equal branch of government at the highest level here in the United States of America. That is not an extreme position. That should be a mainstream position on the other side of the aisle, but apparently it is not. Go here and then come back up. Yeah.
House be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 2A1 of Rule 9, I rise to give notice of my intent to raise a question of the privileges of the House. The form of the resolution is as follows. House Resolution 114. Resolved that pursuant to Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2 of the Constitution of the United States, Representative George Santos be, and he hereby is, expelled from the House of Representatives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Under Rule 9, a resolution offered from the floor by the member other than the majority leader or the minority leader as a question of privilege of the House has immediate precedent only at a time designated by the chair within 2 legislative days after the resolution is properly noticed. Pending that decision, the form of the resolution noticed by the gentleman from California will appear in the record at this point. The chair will not, at this point, determine whether the resolution constitutes a question of privilege. That determination will be made at the time designated by the consideration of the resolution.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in opposition to the motion to refer the resolution to expel George Santos to the House Ethics Committee. This is already an ongoing investigation in the Ethics Committee based on a complaint that I filed in January. And this resolution was already referred to the Ethics Committee on February 9th. But as is customary, and as my Republican colleagues know very well, that investigation is on hold until the federal criminal investigation and prosecution is resolved. So, despite my colleagues' statements to the contrary, there will be nothing quick about the ethics process. This motion today was therefore simply a way for Republicans to continue to cover for Mr. Santos. Many have called for his removal, especially freshman Republican members from New York, but when finally given an opportunity to walk the talk, they instead sat with Mr. Santos. Make no mistake about it. A vote in support of this motion today is a vote in support of Mr. Santos.
The gentleman's time has expired.
I yield back.
For what purpose is the
Again, the conspiracy theorists on the other side of the aisle continue to, peddle fantasies about the deep state, continue to attack the FBI and federal law enforcement officials, and it's all in service of defending the insurrectionist in chief, who they continue to bend the knee to, and who apparently is the leading Republican candidate for president, despite all that we have seen over the last several years. They can't find someone else, someone more reasonable, rational, someone who behaves like a normal human being. They can't find someone else. And so it's a sad state of affairs in terms of who has taken over the Republican Party. This is not Bob Dole's Republican Party. It's not John McCain's Republican Party. This is not Mitt Romney's Republican Party. It's George Santos's Republican Party, and it's Marjorie Taylor Greene's Republican Party. And how do we know that? Yesterday, they defended George Santos, defended him, protected him, shielded George Santos from accountability. They don't even want an up or down vote on expulsion. For George Santos, this is not an ordinary situation. This is one of the most extraordinary situations that the Congress has ever seen in our nation's history. George Santos lied about his entire life, lied about his jobs, lied about his finances, lied about his charitable work, lied about his professional background, lied about his education, lied about his mother perishing during September 11th, lied about his Jewish heritage. His whole life is a fiction, and it was made up so that he could get elected to Congress under false pretenses. And, by the way, he pled guilty to criminal conduct in Brazil. And notwithstanding that entire parade of horribles of a life resume, George Santos was protected and defended and coddled by House Republicans, many of whom, including so-called moderates in New York, promised accountability, but the first opportunity they got to prove whether they meant what they said, these so-called moderates voted with the extremists, as they always do, to shield and defend and coddle George Santos. This is who the Republican Party, unfortunately, has become at this moment in time.
The failed wars in Afghanistan and Iraq added trillions of dollars to the debt
and both began under a Republican president. The 2001, 2003, and 2017 tax cuts added trillions to the debt, and each one began under a Republican president. The Great Recessions of 2008 and 2020 added trillions to the debt, and each one began under a Republican president. The Trump administration alone accounted for 1/4 of all the debt accumulated since 2000. The Republican Party is like an arsonist who burns down your home and then blames you for the fire and then lectures you on fire safety. The fiscal responsibility of House Republicans is as fictional as George Santos. The House GOP is threatening to default in America unless it can extract draconian budget cuts against our seniors, veterans, essential workers, and families with children. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not a negotiation. That is an extortion of the American people. That is, in the words of Matt Gaetz, a hostage-taking that will threaten to transform a Republican-made debt problem into a Republican-made debt crisis. I yield
Time's
back.
expired.
So I think it's an incredible contrast that on Wednesday, extreme MAGA Republicans in the House defend, coddle, and continue to play footsie with serial fraudster George Santos. And on Thursday, they want to impeach the President of the United States of America, the FBI director who was appointed by a Republican president, and the Homeland Security Secretary. And who is the face of this effort? Marjorie Taylor Greene. House Republicans have increasingly become the party of Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and George Santos. That is a very sad state of affairs. Last question.
You met yesterday with Governor Kathy Hochul, she's obviously advocating for assistance for New York. Do you have any sense of how realistic it is to expect that Congress would actually step forward with any of that, and what avenue would that take? And if you'll allow me a second question about the man on the billboard beside you, what is the path forward now that this has been sent to the Ethics Committee?
Well, it was a very positive conversation that I had with Governor Hochul. Many of us within the New York delegation are concerned with the growing dynamics in terms of the situation that we confront in New York. And I've heard from people all across the spectrum back at home in New York that we really need to increase the amount of federal resources provided to New York so that New York City and our state can continue to provide for individuals who are seeking asylum or who have fled potential persecution in other countries with the humanity consistent with who we are as a country and certainly who we've been in the city of New York. But this cannot be done without federal assistance, and we certainly are going to continue to aggressively push for that assistance, and it needs to come to New York City sooner rather than later. You had a question about Santos?
Next steps now that the ethics has been referred to the Ethics Committee. Is there anything else you can do on the House floor?
This is what is so cynical about the extreme MAGA Republican effort to shield a serial fraudster from accountability. All Democrats asked for was an up or down vote. But they didn't even want to provide the voters of the 3rd Congressional District in New York, the voters across America, with an up or down vote. The Ethics Committee has had the George Santos matter for months. Months. So what are you referring to the Ethics Committee? It's already before the Ethics Committee. This was an effort to bury accountability for a serial fraudster. Why? Perhaps it's because extreme MAGA Republicans actually need George Santos's vote. He is critical to their ability to govern. George Santos was the deciding vote in passing the Default on America Act. the deciding vote. And to me, that explains, in part, the actions that have been taken by this extreme MAGA Republican majority. Moving forward, we'll continue to explore ways for this egregious, extraordinary situation represented by George Santos's continued presence in the Congress to be dealt with the accountability that the voters of the 3rd Congressional District in New York are demanding, and that the American people are demanding.
Thank you, the distinguished gentleman from Maryland. Boy, is Adam Schiff powerful. He can at once be the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, the special counsel investigating Donald Trump, manage and run the FBI, and be a judge ruling on FISA applications. It is remarkable that he, from his perch in Congress, can do all of that. Of course, he didn't do any of that. All he did was properly impeach the President of the United States for his gross abuse of power. You want to talk about collusion? Let me ask my Republican colleagues, if a campaign manager for a campaign is giving internal information to a Russian intelligence agent, is that collusion? Because that was the once classified information that is now public and now constitutes collusion. And there are so many other issues. There is nothing in this motion, this resolution, that
I want to yield
is
the gentleman
true.
an additional 20 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
One of my colleagues says, we will hold members accountable. You are the party of George Santos. Who are you holding accountable? The guy is an alleged and acknowledged liar and indicted, and you protect him every day. Don't lecture us with your projection and your defense of Donald Trump. It's pathetic, and it's beneath you, and it's beneath this body, and I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Florida.
I yield.
Opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This indeed is a troubling time for government ethics throughout all 3 federal government branches. At this very hour, the twice impeached insurrection inciting former leader of the executive branch and current Republican candidate for president Donald Trump is under arrest in federal court. A grand jury of our fellow citizens indicted him on felony charges of threatening our national security in violation of the Espionage Act and committing obstruction of justice and false statement crimes. Our laws that protect national defense information are critical to the safety and security of the United States, and they must be enforced. Violations of those laws put our country and allies at risk. Meanwhile, at the top of the judicial branch, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is embroiled in a variety of ethics scandals. For decades, Justice Thomas has engaged in a pattern of accepting and, in violation of disclosure requirements, concealing gifts and luxury vacations received from a billionaire political activist who reportedly had a financial interest in at least one case before the Supreme Court. And here in the legislative branch, just last month, a grand jury indicted Republican Representative George Santos on federal charges of fraudulent schemes, money laundering, theft of public funds, and false statements. That's not counting the pending charges he has in Brazil. I can't imagine, Mr. Chairman, having one of our members of Congress extradited by another country. The House Ethics Committee is now investigating these allegations and whether Mr. Santos engaged in sexual misconduct against someone seeking employment in his congressional office. Although more than a dozen Republican House members, led courageously by Representative D'Esposito of this committee, have called on Mr. Santos to resign, House Republicans prevented Democrats from forcing a vote on expelling Mr. Santos from the House. I ask that all members of this committee to take the opportunity during this hearing to join Representative Diaz-Pasito and me in publicly calling on a bipartisan basis for Mr. Santos to resign. It is clear that ensuring ethical conduct here in the House has never been more important. Let me be clear, I remain committed to fighting against corruption from my years of work to hold judges accountable for sexual assaults, to my work as a member of the Appropriations Committee ensuring appropriate use of taxpayers' funds. Throughout this work, I have seen the ways in which a single bad actor overshadowed the good work of essential institutions. I am deeply concerned about the allegations facing one of our witnesses here today, but we must not let one individual define the entire institution. I sincerely thank the chairman for convening this hearing and the witnesses for their testimony. I am grateful that we are here to get the transparency the American people deserve and use this as an opportunity to strengthen the office of Congressional Ethics because no one is above the law. The Office of Congressional Ethics, or OCE, serves a crucial role as an independent, nonpartisan entity charged with reviewing allegations of misconduct against members, officers, and staff of the House, and when appropriate, referring matters to the Ethics Committee. By the way, while I did eventually find your code of conduct, it did not appear in my search when I looked at your website. It is very valuable for an independent, nonpartisan entity such as OCE to participate in enforcing the House's ethical standards. At the same time, it is important that OCE set an example for ethical, unbiased conduct and ensure fairness in its activities. I look forward to learning more about OCE from our witnesses and working with my colleagues on a bipartisan basis to ensure that it functions as well as possible, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Torres. I now
All right. Last two questions. Kevin and then.
Your meeting with Secretary Mayorkas, Mayor Adams, and others this afternoon, what is your hope for outcome of that meeting? Obviously, it's coming since we're seeing the migrant situation in New York. And then separately, do a status update on the George Santos censure resolution. Cynically, is the fact that we haven't seen it invoked yet because we've seen New York Republicans come out and say they vote for it, thus giving them some cover electorally.
Yeah, there's no reason to believe anything relative to votes on the floor of the House of Representatives that is being said by the so-called moderate Republicans from New York, because on issue after issue, including as it relates to the expulsion resolution brought against George Santos, my Republican colleagues in New York publicly said Santos should be gone. He's not fit to serve in the United States House of Representatives. And the first opportunity they received to actually be responsive to their public commitments to throw George Santos out of Congress, they did the exact opposite. They buried accountability for George Santos with the Ethics Committee and then said that they were promised that the Ethics Committee would act within 60 days. Time's up. Those 60 days have passed. And yet, not a single House Republican from New York has actually stepped forward to say it's time for Congress to act to hold George Santos accountable because he's a serial fraudster who is not fit to serve in the House. As far as I'm concerned, the accountability related to George Santos should be dealt with by the House Republicans. In terms of the censure resolution, that's a question that is best directed at this point in time to Congressman Richie Torres as it relates to his thoughts on timing. So with respect to the meeting with the Secretary, I'm looking forward to a conversation about how we can address issues that are uniquely specific to New York City in terms of the volume of migrants who have arrived over the last several months. And I think Mayor Adams has done the best job that he can, making sure that consistent with who we are as a city that embraces immigrants, that tries to treat folks with the decency and respect that they deserve as they are awaiting their day in court. But we are going to have to get some assistance from us here in Congress, from the federal government, in terms of alleviating some of the burden that has disproportionately fallen on the city of New York. I'm thankful for the presence of Secretary Mayorkas in terms of this conversation. We're looking forward to it, and it's another indication that the administration is going to continue to be there for the city of New York in the best way possible.
Limited number of days left before you guys leave for August recess. Do you have any updates on whether you will try to bring the privileged censure resolution against George Santos to the floor?
We haven't had an opportunity to discuss timing around the Santos issue, but understand the extreme MAGA Republican majority is more concerned with defending serial fraudster George Santos than defending the health, the safety, or the economic well-being of the American people. We were told months ago that the Ethics Committee would conclude its work in an expedited way within 60 days. 60 days have expired, and we've heard nothing but crickets from the Ethics Committee. Why? Because extreme MAGA Republicans have no interest in holding serial fraudster George Santos accountable. They are defending him in the same way that they defend Marjorie Taylor Greene, and in the same way that they're defending Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his wild conspiracy theories. Second row.
So there is going to
Nick.
So it's Wednesday, 2 days to the end of the session. It's the last day that you guys can force floor consideration of the privileged censure resolutions for George Santos and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Do you support them coming to the floor this week?
I haven't talked to the author of the Marjorie Taylor Greene resolution, to Representative Becca Ballant, about her intentions. What I will say is that there is a process. House Democrats have stood and said George Santos does not belong in Congress. The Ethics Committee had 60 days. 60 days has come and gone. We await the product of their work. But we strongly feel that this is an individual that doesn't deserve to walk in these halls of Congress, and that is a serial fraudster. So we'll see where the week takes us. I can't speak to the authors and their intentions, whether they plan to bring these up or not. That's a question for them.
If you'll indulge me with two. First is, you just spoke about unity within your conference. You had the resolution that you put forward has roughly 400, when I checked this morning, names. One, how important is it that you have unity within your caucus on that resolution, or are you okay with ones who do not sign on to it? And secondly, I'm going to change topics a little bit on you. There's been a resolution put forward by New York Republicans to expel George Santos from Congress on these new superseding indictments. Congress has only expelled 2 members in recent history, both after they were convicted. Obviously, an expulsion needs 2/3 to have happen, which means they would need votes from you. Are you willing to provide those?
I'll ask both the Vice Chair and Ranking Member Meeks to speak on both of these issues. One, because it's his resolution, but also as a member of the New York delegation. What I'll say to your first point, Leader Jeffries has said, and we've said this throughout the last 10 months, unity does not mean unanimity. The Democratic caucus can be unified behind our values, behind our purpose, behind the policy that we support. And that doesn't always mean we have unanimity. I expect if this resolution comes to a vote, which I hope it does soon, if Republicans set the chaos aside and we have someone to preside, I would assume it's going to have an extremely strong bipartisan vote that sends a message to one of our most important allies in Israel. That's the story. That's what we hope is discussed, and we will let our members make their own decisions. Second point, serial fraudster George Santos is only in Congress because House Republicans protected him in May. When resolutions came up, they voted to table it. And they have to live with that. And now I understand that some of them might want a redo, just like, the former speaker might want a redo. That's not where we are. And so, we will see what the floor activity is on an expulsion resolution. Obviously, it has a high threshold, but we firmly believe, the House Democratic Caucus firmly believes, that individual, that George Santos, does not meet the standards of someone who should serve under this dome. We've been very clear about that. It's only our Republican colleagues who have protected him, namely because they need the vote. Anytime we see something, and George Santos has been the deciding vote on items of policy over the last few months, they need his vote. That's why they protect him. That's why he's still here. Yield to the Vice Chair and then Ranking Member Meeks.
The command purportedly known as George Santos should resign. Multiple Democratic members of Congress and Republican members of Congress have called on him to resign. I believe if a motion to expel was put on the floor, it would pass. He can save himself that embarrassment by simply resigning.
The leader is exactly right as to the resolution. Everyone is considering it in the Democratic caucus, but members will make their own choice. We've now up to over 400 members that have signed on.
Can I ask you about the new indictment of your New York colleague?
I haven't yet read it, so I'm going to read it first.
Are you still calling on him to resign? Do more charges make it a bigger push here for him to step out of Congress?
Well, yes, but I also think, perhaps more importantly, the fact that a co-conspirator of his has now pled guilty and admitted to committing campaign finance fraud with George Santos is just further proof, confirmation that he committed crimes in order to dupe the voters of his district and get to Congress. And when someone commits such brazen crimes that have now been admitted to in court, it's not just an allegation anymore, it is confirmatory proof that he deceived the voters in order to be here in Congress. So unlike potentially other situations where you might want to let the legal system play out, in this case he has admitted to lying, his co-conspirator has admitted to committing a crime, and it was all done so that he could be here, which means that he is not fit to be here and he should resign immediately.
New York, Mr. Goldman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Santos. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of this resolution to expel George Santos from Congress, as I did in May when I co-sponsored a similar expulsion resolution that the sponsors of today's resolution, my Republican colleagues from New York, did not support. I agree with everything that my Republican colleagues have said here today. But everything they have said here today was also true in May when they voted to protect George Santos. Has there been anything that has changed? Nothing about the numerous lies that Mr. Santos admitted himself to making in order to deceive his voters into electing him. Nothing about his status as an indicted criminal defendant. Yes, there has been a superseding indictment with more allegations of criminal conduct, but he is still presumed innocent until proven guilty, as my New York friends relied upon in May when they voted to protect George Santos from expulsion. Nothing has changed from the Ethics Committee, even though one of my colleagues from New York said that the Ethics Committee would expedite its investigation and release a report 60 days from the date of that May vote. Well, we are now 175 days since then, and there is no ethics report that would prompt a change of heart. One thing that has changed is that Mr. Santos's campaign treasurer pled guilty to fraud and admitted under oath that she conspired with Mr. Santos to fabricate a non-existent $500,000 loan to his campaign. But the resolution drafted by my friends from New York does not even mention that new fact. So what really has changed since May? Is it because we are learning revelations of connections between Mr. Santos and our other Republican colleagues from New York serving in this body? Maybe. But there is certainly one thing we know that is motivating this change of heart: the 2024 election. You see, I know that the people of New York care about integrity. They care that one of their Republican representatives is a liar and a fraud. They care about the fact that Mr. Santos has done nothing to serve his constituents, yet still provides a loyal and vital vote to the Republican Party. And George Santos hangs like an albatross around the necks of every single Republican from New York. They don't care anymore today about integrity or morality or the reputation of this institution than they did in May when they voted to protect Mr. Santos. They just care about their re-election in 1 year when they know that their support for George Santos is going to be a problem. Mr. Santos should be expelled from Congress today for the same reasons that he should have been expelled in May. He himself admitted to numerous lies that he made during the campaign to deceive the voters. He is only walking these halls and voting on this floor because of those lies. And now we have additional testimony that he conspired to commit fraud. Democrats will once again vote to expel someone who should never have had the honor of walking these halls and voting on legislation affecting the American people. The only question is whether Republicans care more about honor and integrity than they do about political power. I hope the answer is yes, but I fear the answer is no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Kevin? Well, let's wait until the ethics report is released and members have had an opportunity to review it, because now that there will be an actual investigation with actual findings that presumably will have been arrived at in a bipartisan way, the Ethics Committee being evenly divided amongst Democrats and Republicans, I think it requires a serious analysis of that ethics report, and then hopefully a bipartisan conclusion as to the appropriate way to deal with George Santos. After evaluating the ethics report, it's the case that I think I would make to the entire Congress and to the American people if the ethics report clearly justifies expulsion. Okay.
We're going to get this ethics report tomorrow from George Santos. He has not been convicted in the court of law. The precedent in the House of Representatives is for a member to have been convicted for a member of the Confederacy. That said, do you think it's appropriate to vote to expel someone like George Santos now that he's had due process, but not due process in a court of law?
Well, any expulsion resolution should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Seems to me that George Santos is unfit to serve as a member of Congress based on the clear lies that he had told to the people of the 3rd Congressional District in New York. He is a serial fraudster. But in terms of any expulsion resolution that is before the Congress, potentially at the end of this month or the beginning of next month, I'll reserve judgment until I've had an opportunity to review the ethics report.
Thank you, Congressman Garcia, and thank you for filing this motion, this resolution, rather. It is a shame that it has come to this. It is a shame that the Speaker of the House, the Republican Conference Chairwoman, Elise Stefanik, who was George Santos's biggest supporter during his campaign and helped him rehire staff after many resigned because of his lies. It is a shame that they did not ask George Santos to resign from Congress and instead thought that they could stem the wave of opposition based on making him resign from his committees. He should have resigned. He should not be a member of Congress. And we are left with no choice but to put a resolution on the House floor to expel him from Congress. He defrauded his voters. He defrauded the state of New York. He has used in the most shameless fashion his the true monuments, or I should say the true travesties of so many different communities, including the LGBT community and the Pulse nightclub, including the Jewish community, by claiming falsely that he is Jewish in a district that is more than 20% Jewish, and claiming that his ancestors escaped the Holocaust. This is not just a simple liar. This is a con man who does not belong in Congress, and he needs to go. So we will put this resolution on the floor, and we will have an up or down vote on whether or not George Santos, a serial fraudster, belongs as a member of Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Congressman. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Just a few minutes ago, we filed in the House floor an expulsion of George Santos, of Congressman Santos. It's really important for us to recognize that George Santos is a fraud, a liar. He has lied about the most horrific shooting in LGBTQ modern history, the Pulse nightclub shooting. He's lied about 9/11. He's lied about the Holocaust. He's lied about his education. He's lied about his career. And as we all know, just recently, he's been now given classified access to important information and classified information that he should not have. There's been numerous Republicans that have called for his expulsion or resignation from Congress. I want to also note that today myself and the two other freshman members that are LGBTQ, Congresswoman Becca Balint, Congressman Eric Sorensen, have been talking about this expulsion resolution to get George Santos out of Congress. In addition to that, two other members have been leading efforts to really take on George Santos, and of course that has been Congressman Dan Goldman, who's also a freshman, and Congressman Richie Torres. And they have been leading efforts as well with the House Ethics Committee. And so those have been things that have been really, really important for us, particularly as freshmen and their leadership. And so again, we have filed an official expulsion resolution with the House Ethics Committee to get rid of George Santos. It is time for him to go. We gave him plenty of time to resign, and he has chosen not to do so. So I want to first turn this over to Congresswoman Becca Balint, who's going to say a few words, and then we're going to have a few folks also engaged.
Thank you, Robert. Really happy to be out here.
We want to just also note that Congressman Torres, Congresswoman Balint, Congressman Sorensen, myself, we're all LGBTQ. And George Santos, of course, is gay, we think. And he has disgraced our community. And what we hear within our community is a huge disgust and shame for his behavior and his lies within our own community. So it's important for us as gay people, as queer people.
Minus Dan Goldman.
Of course, and an ally, which with Mr. Goldman, to take on really this liar and this fraud. And so this has already been filed today. We look forward to working. We've been talking, of course, to House Republicans. We already know many of those who have already asked for his resignation, and so we're going to get this onto the floor, and we're going to expel George Santos. So thank you very much. Are there any quick questions?
Why not wait for an indictment?
Here's Congressman Richie Torres.
You know, yesterday George Santos said that he refuses to go to the back of the room or the back of the bus. And, you know, it's plausible that Mr. Santos is so delusional that he's mistaking himself for Rosa Parks. But he is not a victim here. We're the victim of his fraudulent behavior. You know, Senator Mitt Romney spoke for the majority of Americans. He spoke for both Democrats and Republicans when he referred to George Santos as a sick man. There is something sick about a man who lies about his mother dying on 9/11, who lies about his employees dying in the Pulse mass shooting, who lies about his ancestors surviving the Holocaust, who lies about struggling with brain cancer. There's something sick about a man who not only lies pathologically, but violates almost every law imaginable. House ethics, campaign finance law, securities law. And so we're here to send a clear message that if Kevin McCarthy refuses to hold George Santos accountable, we will. We will hold George Santos accountable for conduct unbecoming of a congressman. We are going to expel George Santos because he is a deep rot at the very core of the United States Congress. In a country of 330 million people, only 535 have the high honor of serving in the United States Congress. One of those people should not be George Santos, period.
Absolutely. And
Are you just worried about any kind of precedents this might set in the future if Republicans decide that a Democrat's a liar?
Yeah, this is an unprecedented person. I mean, there is nothing that we know about him that we know is truthful. He's lied literally about his entire background. And so I think this is an unprecedented moment, and the House should come together to expel him.
We also do want to set a precedent for excluding a future George Santos. That's the kind of precedent we want to set.
And I can guarantee that all five of us would be standing here. We wouldn't need to be standing here if there was a Democrat who lied up and down like George Santos did. We as Democrats would never accept this within our own party, and it's time for the Republican Party to do the right thing.
Absolutely. Any other final questions? I have not personally spoken directly to him. I've passed him in the halls, but we have not checked it. I look forward to talking to him. I tell him to his face that he should be expelled.
Has anyone else spoken with him?
He's attacked me on Twitter. I think, what did he say? Stop obsessing about me, I'm married. I will admit that I'm fully obsessed with driving Mr. Santos out of Congress because he has no business being here.
Have you guys communicated with Leader Jeffries about this? Because Jeffries has said repeatedly that he thinks that Santos is Republicans' mess for them to clean up and not for the Democrats to handle.
Yes, absolutely. So we've been actually talking to the leader, and so he's aware of what's happening today.
You don't think you can get 70 Republicans onto this, though, do you?
I think we should. I think we're going to work to get 7 Republicans. We're going to work to expel them. I think that's the goal.
But regardless of whether Republicans, the American people have a right to know where each and every member of Congress stands with respect to George Santos. Right? It's one thing to condemn him behind the scenes. It's something else to force a vote and see where everyone stands. I think we need transparency.
Absolutely.
And we need to restore the full faith and trust of the government that is representing the people.
Regardless of the outcome.
Absolutely. I think we should, and we're going to demand a vote, and I think at the end of the day, we want to know also where Kevin McCarthy stands. I mean, clearly he's giving them access to classified briefings, unacceptable, so it's time to expel George Santos.
And one last thing that related to Kevin McCarthy and Elise Stefanik, they have not asked him to resign. Now, some people have said that's because they have such a narrow majority, but there's been extensive reporting that they both were aware of George Santos's lies during the campaign. And the question then is, are they not asking him to resign because they are worried about what their involvement was and that might come out? So that's an open question that has yet to be answered. They have not addressed that.
And Kevin McCarthy forced him out of his committee. We're just saying, why stop there?
We're really happy to be out here today to say that so many of us ran on a platform of shoring up the democracy, of making it possible for Americans to believe in government again. And right now, many of you know we're at an all-time low of confidence in government. 60 years ago, 75% of Americans polled said that they had trust that the government would, most of the time, take care of them, do right by them. Right now, only 2 in 10 Americans will say that. Having George Santos in Congress with us is not at all helping us to rebuild trust in government. And as Robert said, as a proud member of the LGBTQ community, outraged that he lied about the Pulse nightclub shooting, as the granddaughter of someone killed in the Holocaust, outraged that he used that to get elected. And I never thought I'd say this, but I stand with Mitt Romney. He has to go.
And Congressman Eric Sorensen?